Hey, good evening, everybody. Let me first, first order of things. For those of you who have never been in this building, the bathrooms are in the building across the hall. First things first. Second thing is I'm Mark Gibney of the Political Science Department. This is a talk co-sponsored by the Political Science Department, the ACLU of Western North Carolina, and the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Department on campus. Robin will be giving 2 talks on campus. Tonight is going to be more law-focused, and that changes almost by the hour, does it not? And then tomorrow at 2 p.m. up at the College for Seniors, there'll be a talk that Robin will give that will be more personal in nature, more of a personal journey. So that tonight is more law, but any question and every question is open for discussion. The 2024 election, I'm going to give you a preview here. In the election, there's going to be every effort by one of the political parties to make this a referendum on transgender. And particularly transgender, do you want your daughter to be playing against boys? I mean, this is going to be every effort. And if you think I'm over-exaggerating, go back to the year 2004, right? That was the George W. Bush and the John Kerry race. There was every effort, and it was successful, I think, to make this a referendum on gay marriage. And you may remember at that time, it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and that brought the voters out. And there'll be every effort to make this election the same kind of thing on one particular issue and distract the electorate as much as you can. So tonight, as I said, Robin will be talking about some of the laws, and think that in many respects the laws began in North Carolina, in this state, in our state here, with the bathroom bill in I think 2016, and then it has just morphed into almost every aspect of life here. So a few words about Robin, who is an attorney and an advocate, and I'm guessing that much of your practice now deals with transgender issues, would you say, or no, not necessarily? Yeah. Still ambulance chasing? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Exactly.
Exactly. Okay. But it's also a personal connection. Robin and I went to law school together. We graduated the same year. Robin was on law review, meaning the top 10% of the class, and my students will not be surprised to know that I was not law review. But I take some solace here from the Bible. And it's not the reading of the Bible, it's the part that says, those who are last shall be first. And so I feel somehow I have come out ahead. In terms of personal connection, as I said, Robin's, both of us have changed, but I think both of us have not changed. Robin is smart, funny, passionate, and I would add brave. So without any other words from me, let me turn it over to Robin. What we'll do is Robin will talk, and then we'll have some question and answer period following that. Okay, so I hope for an aggressive audience, and I do know we'll get an enthusiastic response from my dear friend, an old friend, Robin Geigel. Robin?
Thank you, Professor Gibney. And thank you all for coming. Thank you to the university for inviting me, to all the departments that have invited me, to the ACLU of Western North Carolina. It's an absolute honor to be here. I want to say that my style is already cramped because I'm a lawyer. I'm used to pacing back and forth, and I can't because they have me on a camera and they tell me I have to stand here. So if I seem uncomfortable, it's because I'm not used to standing at a podium and speaking unless I'm arguing in front of an appellate court, in which case they don't let you pace. But anyway, thank you so much for having me. Let me give you a few disclaimers before I begin. And disclaimers is the first thing that they teach you in law school. All lawyers have to give disclaimers. Hawkins versus McGee, Professor Gibney. I am an attorney. I am not here to give anyone legal advice. I am not an attorney in the state of North Carolina, so I cannot give legal advice in the state of North Carolina. So I'm here to talk about the law, but I'm here to talk about the law generally. Secondly, I am a transgender woman. And so I come to this with a point of view. I have a personal bias. These issues impact me personally. So I want to disclose that up front so that you know, because we all have personal biases, and it's important that when we talk about issues that we lay those biases on the table so that we all understand where we're coming from. So I want you to know that about me. I am one trans person. I don't speak monolithically for the trans community. There are as many trans experiences as there are trans people. I have one lived experience as a trans woman. I don't have the right to speak for all trans people. I don't have the right to speak for anyone other than myself. But I probably know a lot of trans people, and so I know a lot of other people's lived experiences from breaking bread with them, from being with them, from talking to them, from representing them. So, although I speak only from my own lived experience, I think generally I probably have more information than a lot of people do on these issues. Again, I'm still only one person. And I'm one 70-year-old person. And that's important, and it's important for a couple reasons. First of all, it's important because, again, my experience as a transgender woman is going to be far different from somebody who was born in 2000. I was born in 1952. We didn't have computers. We didn't have a lot of things. There was no internet. We didn't talk about sex, no less talk about people who are transgender or gay or non-binary. Those issues weren't discussed at all. And that's the second reason why my age is important. Because one of the things that you see thrown around so much with regard to all the transgender legislation that's being proposed, and most of it deals with young kids. So anyone under the age of 18, although some states are trying to make it 21, 26, etc. But most of it is aimed at trans youth right now. And the biggest argument is those kids are too young to know. They don't know who they are. Again, I am here as one trans person to tell you they do know who they are. Because I knew at the age of 3 or 4 that I was not the person that everybody else saw me as. I knew I was a girl like my sisters. But again, I was born in 1952. There were no words for that. There was no way for me to express that. But it certainly wasn't a social contagion that brought me to the realization that I was a girl. It certainly wasn't the internet that brought me to that realization. And it certainly wasn't peer pressure that brought me to that realization. I knew it internally, instinctively. I don't know how. I don't know where it comes from. I didn't ask to be trans. I just was. And if you take nothing else away, and I know most of you know this, being transgender is not a lifestyle choice. This is not something you choose. It chooses you. And so these kids who say, this is who I am, we're putting them at risk by ignoring them. And I tell you that again from my own personal experience. I'm not going to take your time because probably most of you know better than I how to define the terminology that we use when we're talking about LGBTQIA issues, and in particular about trans and non-binary issues. And again, because I'm 70, the people in the audience, there might be some trans non-binary people in the audience, your experience will be different from mine, but your language might also be different than mine. And we in the trans community have to recognize that we all have different lived experiences, and we all use different language to express that lived experience. And so, again, it's important that we all understand that You may use one term for something, I may use something else, but we're all here together to be part of this. So I just wanted to find probably one term, maybe two, because the second one becomes important in terms of the law. The first one is gender identity, the simplest thing, all right? Transgender, it's somebody whose gender identity, that deeply held knowledge of who you are, be that male, female, or somewhere on a spectrum, neither male, neither female, or both. Your deeply held sense of who you are, your gender identity, does not align with the sex that you were assigned at birth. Now, why do I say there's two terms that I want to use here? Cisgender people, people whose gender identity and sex assigned at birth align, don't realize that they have a gender identity. They just assume gender identity only deals with trans and non-binary people. Everybody in this room who is cisgender, meaning your gender identity and the sex that you were assigned at birth align, you have a gender identity, just like I do, all right? And if I ask you to define what makes you a man or a woman, and we'll just deal with the binary for now, what makes you a man or a woman? I think your default would be to genitalia. I have a penis, I'm a man. I have a vagina, I'm a woman. And if I said, no, you can't use genitalia, you can't do that. And you'd say, well, why can't I? Well, here's the simplest answer. I don't know if there's any Hemingway fans here. Jake Barnes mean anything to you? It's rumored that Jake Barnes, who's a character in The Sun Also Rises, was emasculated in World War I. And so I use Jake as my example. If a man, a cisgendered man, had a horrible accident and he lost his genitalia, and that was devastating. When he woke up the next morning, he'd be emotionally scarred, he'd be physically scarred, but the one thing he wouldn't say is, oh, I'm a woman now. That's because his gender identity is still male. And so if I said, no, you can't use genitalia, I just showed you why it doesn't work, what else? What makes you a man or a woman? You'd say, I don't know. I like sewing, I'm into this, I'm into that. Those are just sex stereotypes. That's all they are. And that doesn't make you a man or a woman. If I said, come on, what makes you a man or a woman? I think you'd finally say, Robin, I don't know, I just am. Hold on to that. The I don't know, I just am. That's your gender identity. And for someone like me, the I don't know, I just am was female. But again, everyone saw me as male. So I said that there was another term that I wanted to define, and that's sex assigned at birth. And you notice that I didn't use biological sex, and I've done that on purpose. And when we get to the law, you'll see that many of these laws that are being passed try to use the terminology biological sex. So why don't I, as an advocate, why as a trans person, why don't I use biological sex? After all, I know I was born with a penis, I had male genitalia, I lived in this world for 50 plus years as a man. Why can't I say biological sex? And the reason is that most biologists, geneticists, doctors theorize that gender identity is formed by genetics. That in some people, for some reason, a gene that is supposed to turn on to conform your gender identity to the sex that you're developing at doesn't turn on, or one turns on that shouldn't turn on. And as a result, you wind up with genitalia of one gender and a gender identity of another. This is not Robin Geigel's theory. I mean, there's a book called The Gene. It's written by Dr. Siddhartha Mukherjee. And it's Dr. Mukherjee and others who have come up with this hypothesis in terms of gender identity. So if we're talking about genetics, if we're talking about genes, we're talking about biology. So if you say someone's biological sex and you're leaving out the genome, well, then you're leaving out part of the biology. So biological sex doesn't do it. It doesn't define it the right way. So that's why we say sex assigned at birth. And what is sex assigned at birth? Go back to where we start. When you're born, be it the nurse, the doctor, the midwife, the emergency room physician, whoever says, Mom, there's a penis, congratulations, you have a little boy. There's a vagina, congratulations, Mom, you have a little girl. That's sex assigned at birth. That's all it is. The observation of external genitalia. And so that is a more precise term when you're dealing with trans and non-binary individuals, because there's still another biological component, the genome, that you can see when the baby is born. And as the child develops, maybe the genetic code, maybe some gene that didn't turn on what that was supposed to, will cause that child to have a gender identity that does not match the sex assigned at birth. That, again, to me, in my humble opinion, is all biology. So, as Mark said, here we are back at the scene of the crime. In February of 2016, I think it was, North Carolina passed HB 2, the infamous bathroom bill. And I don't know how many of you folks were in North Carolina at the time, but there was a hue and cry that echoed throughout the country. Bruce Springsteen canceled concerts. The NCAA threatened to not allow any tournament games in the state of North Carolina for a period of 6 years. The NBA pulled playoff games. All of a sudden, there were financial ramifications for the state of North Carolina. And as a result, eventually, I believe it was in November or December of 2016, it was repealed and it went away. Fast forward, here we are in 2023. Since January 1st of this year, and it probably has increased since I was flying down from New Jersey, there have been over 480 bills introduced in various state legislatures aimed at the LGBTQIA community, and in particular, involving the transgender community. Why? What changed, and why isn't there a hue and cry like there was in 2016? What has changed? And obviously, I think it's the political landscape of this country. And I'm not here to give a political speech. I'm not here to support one party or demonize any other party. I'm here just to tell you the facts as I see them, again, with my own bias that I've already announced to you. And what has changed is that people have realized that, number one, if you do this in a big spectrum, if you do it across the board in many states, approximately 20 plus states, as opposed to one state, it's very hard to organize boycotts and pull NBA games or March Madness or Bruce Springsteen concerts. It's much harder to do that because then you're impacting those organizations and not just the states. So it's been a concerted effort in terms of let's all be in this together. The second thing has changed is that, believe it or not, I think what has changed, again, is something that Mark mentioned, is that same-sex marriage is now legal. That is off the table. So going after the LGBTQ community in terms of marriage equality is no longer an option. So what are we going to do? How are we going to attack someone that is, marginalized. Let's go after the transgender community. So let's look at the demographics of the transgender community. Demographically, most people speculate that somewhere between 0.5% and 1%, maybe 1.5% of the population is transgender or non-binary. So what's that mean in terms of numbers? So there's 330 million people in the United States. Translate that into numbers, it means that roughly, rounding, there's 1.5 million to 3 million transgender non-binary people in the United States of America. Not a real broad spectrum of people. And yet, if you look at the legislation that was introduced or has been introduced across the country, many of these bills bear the number 1, which means it's the first bill introduced in the legislature in this session. So that means that all of these bills were the first priority for the party that introduced them. Now, I just said, we're talking about 1.5 million to 3 million people. Let me give you some other numbers, just by way of comparison. There's approximately 38 million people living below the poverty line in this country. There's approximately 28 million people without health insurance in this country. There's approximately 1.6 million people in the state of North Carolina on the SNAP program. There's approximately 600,000 people homeless in this country. And yet, these are the bills that are the top priority. I don't know, I am not going to characterize it. It's not my place to characterize it. I'll allow you to draw your own conclusions. But if you have those kinds of numbers, in terms of people living in poverty, in terms of people living without insurance, in terms of people in your own state who are on the SNAP program because they have food insecurity, why are we prioritizing a tax on 1.5 to 3 million people? It doesn't make any logical sense. It doesn't make any sense other than this is what we can do to get people fired up, because there's not a lot of trans people. Most people don't understand what transgender means. Most people think it's a little strange. So let's attack them because, hey, that gets people excited. And these laws, as I've said, kind of fall into certain buckets, and most of them have been designed to attack transgender youth. So there's bills, and again, bear with me, I'm going to give you some numbers. And an interesting aside here, I gave a talk at Villanova Law School virtually about 2 weeks ago. And I did these numbers. And then on, what's today, Thursday, on Tuesday night, I went over them to update them. And the numbers had changed dramatically in 2 weeks. So, here's where we are. 14 states, as of 2 weeks ago it was 9, banned transgender health care for minors under the age of 18. 2 of those, it was 1, Alabama and Idaho, make it a felony to provide transgender health care to minors. 2 more states are in the process of enacting those laws. 1 of those states, and soon to be 2, require minors who have already transitioned to detransition. So let me kind of explain what that means in plain English. It means if you are a 12, 13, 14-year-old child, and you are fortunate enough to have parents who accept you and affirm you and say, we want to help you because you're our child and we love you even if we don't understand you, which is exactly what my mother said to me when I came out to her when she was 87 years old or 85 years old. She said, I don't understand this, I don't like it, I don't want it, but you're my child and I'll always love you. And so you have parents of 12, 13, 14-year-old kids who say, you're my child, and I love you. I don't understand it, but I love you. And we'll take care of you. And if they have the financial wherewithal, which is even rarer than affirming parents, to seek medical interventions for their child, they can obtain drugs that will delay the child's puberty. So why is that so critically important? Think about your own puberty when you were growing up. It's a defining moment. But think about it now from the point of view of somebody like me, who believes that they're a woman, or in the case of a 12 or a 13-year-old, a girl, young woman, and yet their voice is deepening, they're getting body hair, developing an Adam's apple, getting muscle mass, none of which they want. Or if you're a trans boy, your breasts are developing, your hips are widening, maybe you've gotten your period. None of those things you want. So puberty-delaying drugs, and the primary one is Lupron, which is also used for many things, including part of the process for in vitro fertilization and precocious puberty. So it's not an unknown drug. What they do is they give children this drug to delay puberty, to hold things in place, to make sure this is the right decision for the child. And after a course of that, if they believe that this child is truly transgender, and again, the parents have the financial wherewithal and are affirming, which again doesn't happen in most cases, then you can put the child, if they were assigned male at birth, you put them on estrogen. If they were assigned female at birth, you put them on testosterone. And they develop, then they go through the puberty in accordance with their gender identity. So that's the basic medical science behind all this. What these states are saying is that if you have parents that have done this for you, and you're going through this, and you have doctors and healthcare providers who are doing this for you, you have to stop. Women, think about what it would have been like for you as a 13-year-old young girl for somebody to say, you know what, we want you to start developing a beard, we want your voice to deepen, we want you to grow body hair, because that's exactly what's going to happen to these young trans girls. And the opposite is going to happen to those young trans boys. They're going to get their period. Their breasts are going to develop. And what's going to happen? Some of those kids might take their own lives. The rate of suicide ideation, I'll get teased for that later. The rate of suicide ideation in the transgender community is around 40%. And it's not because being transgender means there's something mentally unstable about you. It doesn't mean that there's something mentally wrong or emotionally wrong with you. Why the rate is so high is because people aren't affirmed. They are mocked, they're bullied, they're beat up. If they're old enough, they're thrown out of their houses. They lose their jobs, they lose their family, they lose the support systems that we all need. And now you're going to say to those children, even though you have affirming parents, we're taking that all away from you. That is a dangerous cocktail. And I don't want to see anyone hurt, and I'm not, I don't want my prediction to be right. But just knowing that when you take affirmation away from a child, it causes them to slide into a depression. It worries me. I have great fear for the future of these trans kids. I would also note that those rates of suicide go down to what it would be for the general population when those children are affirmed and accepted for who they are. And it's the same for transgender adults. If you don't lose your job, if you aren't homeless, if you have a support system in place, you can make it through. It's not a mental illness. It's the rejection. It's the fear of coming out, the fear of being rejected. I know those fears. They're real. At some point, you begin to think the world would be better off without me than knowing the truth about me. And so those states that are forcing kids to detransition, it's a very dangerous game. There are 21 states, was 19 2 weeks ago, that ban transgender girls from participating in sports in accordance with their gender identity. Unfortunately, it looks like North Carolina may soon be joining that collection of states. 7 states, it was 3, banned children from using bathrooms in accordance with their gender identity. 1 state, Alabama, requires teachers to out their transgender students. 4 other states, Florida, Kentucky, Utah, and Arizona, don't require it, but they encourage it. Arkansas and Florida are advancing bills that would make it a felony for any adult to use a public restroom other than the one that they were assigned, in accordance with the one that they were assigned at birth. So again, think about that for a minute. If I go to Disney World and they pass that law, I have to use the men's room. That's the law. Otherwise, I'm committing a felony. Now, you might say, what's the big deal? Think about it from the other way around. There are trans men, and there are trans men who are very masculine and look very masculine and are very imposing. And under the law, they now have to use the women's room. And if the whole design of these statutes is to protect women in women's rooms, which is what we're told is the design of these statutes, then you are encouraging cisgender men to say, oh, I'm a trans man, I'm going in the ladies' room. And who's going to stop them? They're just following the law. Or are they? They're not. They're obviously doing something, they're taking advantage of a situation, but it's a situation that was created for a problem that doesn't exist. In the state of New Jersey, we've had a law that says that people who can use places of public accommodation, so bathrooms at a university like this, in accordance with their gender identity. Had it since 2009. Not a problem. No incidents. In the state of North Carolina, you still can use the bathroom in accordance with your gender identity. Is there any mass problems that I'm unaware of that I haven't seen in doing my research about North Carolina? Because I didn't see anything. So these are solutions in search of a problem that doesn't exist. And if you think it's just about kids, it's not. The Attorney General of Missouri last week signed an executive order that is so draconian, and I'm smiling because one of my favorite books of all time is Catch-22. Well, this executive order is Catch-22 because it's not only minors, it's adults. And it says that adults cannot receive gender-affirming care if they're being treated for any other condition. So if you're being treated for depression, you can't receive gender-affirming care. Well, isn't that a bit like the chicken and the egg? I mean, you probably have depression because you're not getting gender-affirming care, but you can't get gender-affirming care because you have depression. That's what it says. It's even more draconian, I won't go through it, but it's aimed at transgender adults. About 2 months ago, Michael Knowles, a popular right-wing podcast podcaster at the Daily Wire. And I'm reading this because I want to quote it directly, because I don't want any problems, so I'm going to quote it. "There can be no middle way in dealing with transgenderism. It is all or nothing." Again, I quote, "Transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely." For that statement, he received applause at CPAC. So, again, I'm not going to argue with Michael Knowles and his choice of the word transgenderism and his follow-up that says, oh, I wasn't talking about eliminating transgender people, I was talking about eliminating transgender ideology. Well, I'm here to tell you there is no such thing as transgender ideology. There are transgender people. And as I said at the beginning, there are as many transgender lived experiences as there are transgender people. So we are not a monolith. We don't speak with one voice. And as I said, I don't speak for the community, I speak for me. But if he had said, we have to eliminate Judaism, would there have been any doubt that he was calling for the elimination of Jewish people? I don't think so. And so when you say, I want to eliminate transgenderism, how do you do that without eliminating transgender people? And so, as you might see, these things are a little personal for me. I happen to live in a state right now where I have protections. And as I said, I'm a 70-year-old person. But I have to tell you, this wears on me. It wears on me every day. There are places that I don't feel safe to go because I'm a transgender woman. And I live in the greatest country in the world. And yet, that's my truth. And it's scary, and it's frightening, and it's sad. Because I am not a threat to anyone. I am an attorney for 45 years. I've had a very successful practice. I've managed a law firm for 9 years, a 19-person law firm. 6 of those years were after I transitioned. I am an author. I have 2 novels published, both reviewed by the New York Times. I have a 3rd one coming out in May. I am an advocate on behalf of my community. Most importantly, I am a parent of 3 amazing kids and the grandparent to 5 amazing grandchildren. I think I have helped to contribute to this society and to this world. And yet there are still people who are willing to make blanket statements that I should be eradicated for no reason other than I am a transgender person. And I just don't understand how that's acceptable in this country. How we have gotten to this point where it's okay to say, eradicate people because we don't like who they are because they're different from us, because they don't fit in with the rest of us. So, from a legal perspective, you're going to see, obviously, challenges to all of these attempts in terms of sports and healthcare, primarily healthcare. And they're being led by the ACLU. Thank you, ACLU. They're being led by Lambda Legal and other organizations in the individual states. And the primary focus of the challenges to these laws will be based on what's called 1983. So 1983 is a federal statute that protects people's constitutional civil rights. And in this case, basically what they're doing is challenging these laws based on equal protection, that they have singled out a group of people and they're saying you can't do that under the law. One of the things that is helpful in that regard was the decision by the U.S. Supreme Court back in 2020 in a case, Ostock versus Clayton County, which was actually an employment case brought under Title VII. But Title VII has a phrase in it that says you can't discriminate in employment because of sex. And in that Supreme Court decision, the court held that because of sex included you can't discriminate against somebody because they're gay, and you can't discriminate against somebody because they're transgender. Because if you do, you're discriminating against them because of their sex. So that's the law under Title VII. The law in terms of Title IX, which is used in education and things of that nature, has the exact same phrase. You can't discriminate in athletics and school and things like that because of sex. And so the hope is, because it's always been this way, that the way the federal courts interpret because of sex in a Title VII employment case, they generally defer and say we're going to define it the same way in a Title IX case because it's the exact same language. The hope is that courts, the federal courts, when looking at the equal protection challenges to these laws, will say, well, in Bostock, the court said you can't discriminate because of sex, and that includes transgender people, so you've defined the statute to discriminate against these people and single them out and treat them differently from everybody else, and so they're being discriminated against because of sex, and that's a violation of people's substantive due process rights and equal protection rights. That's the theory. Whether that will hold up as we go forward in terms of these legal challenges, we don't know. The other thing that plays into the challenges in terms of healthcare is HIPAA, which is the federal statute that protects people in terms of their healthcare and privacy in regard to their healthcare. And so, again, I find it interesting that the same people are saying that you can't make decisions for my children in terms of what you're going to teach them in school are the same ones who are saying, but we can make decisions for your children in terms of how you're going to provide health care to them. I think that hopefully those challenges will be successful. The laws in Arkansas and Alabama have been stayed, and we'll see. And there's an interesting intersectionality between these issues and in terms of the Dobbs decision and reproductive rights and things of that nature, and how some of the same arguments that have been used in reproductive rights cases and the anti-abortion challenges are being used in terms of the transgender issues. And on the other side of the coin, some of the same arguments that people who have defended people's right to choose are using the same type of analogies to attack and defend against some of the laws attacking the transgender, in particular transgender youth. In terms of the sports bans, I do want to get up on my podium. Oh, wait, I am at the podium. I do want to get up on my soapbox just for a minute, because the laws that are being passed, first of all, and I don't know the answer to this question, and so maybe there is, can anybody name me a high school transgender girl athlete in the state of North Carolina who's out and open? Okay, and I'm not looking to embarrass anybody. I asked that question because if you look at the states that are passing these laws, the lawmakers acknowledge that they are unaware of any transgender girl competing in high school athletics in their state. And yet they're passing a law to ban it, saying that it's unfair for transgender girls to participate against cisgender girls in high school athletics. But they don't know if there is any. Again, there seems to be a logical disconnect for me in terms of that argument. But I have a bigger argument, and it's a broader argument. And the argument that I have is we've lost our way in this country of what high school athletics are supposed to be about. High school athletics are supposed to be part of a child's education. It's supposed to be part of the learning experience. They're on a team. They're having fun. They're with their teammates.
They're learning, they're growing. That's what high school athletics are supposed to be about. Instead, in this country, it's been all about getting college scholarships, turning pro. You know, we gotta have our kids on the best program. We gotta do this, we gotta do that. The number of high school athletes that receive college scholarships is 2%. 2% of all high school athletes receive college scholarships. And now, most of them aren't full rides. In many sports, you can split the scholarships up. So, you know, 2% includes somebody who has a 25% scholarship or a 10% scholarship. So we have focused all of high school athletics on getting college scholarships, and we've lost our way because that's not what it's about. Because even if you're great, you only have a 2% chance of getting a scholarship. So when we look at the problems, or again, the non-problem that exists in terms of trans girls competing in high school sports, it's not a problem. There are no trans girls at the high school level setting national records, depriving girls, cisgender girls, of anything. There are just kids who want to play on a team, have fun, participate, learn, grow, and be part of something that's not a classroom. And we're saying, no, you can't do that. That's not for you because you're trans. I want to end, hard to end on a positive note after that, but I hope that for those of you in the room who are not transgender, that you will realize we need you to be our allies. And that's not just a token expression on my part. As I said, there's 1.5 million to 3 million trans people. There's not a lot of us. We're not a big voting bloc, folks. So we need you to be our allies. And that means support us. It means come out. It means, you know, maybe showing up at a protest. It means trying to get your local representatives not to pass these bills. It means voting. It means a lot of things. And it might be as simple as being affirming and supportive to a transgender family member, a transgender classmate, a transgender coworker. That might be the thing that they need to get them through. I want to end with 2 things. As I said, I'm trying to do a little bit of an optimistic ending, but I decided not to. So one thing I just want to circle back with real quickly is that you see a lot of things about, oh, you know, the internet, you know, social contagion. There's so many more trans kids now than there was before. And my response to that is, no, there's not. Go back and look at the statistics for what it was back in the 1930s, when people who were born who were left-handed weren't allowed to be left-handed. It was like 2% of the population, because they weren't allowed to use their left hand. It was literally, my mother grew up in a time and a place where she learned to write right-handed, even though she was left-handed. And then if you look at the statistics, they stopped doing that in schools, and they said, you know, maybe we just let our left-handers be left-handed. And you see this dramatic rise. And people are like, oh my God, are there all these more left-handed people being born? And the answer is no. You just finally let them be themselves. You look at my generation. As I said, I grew up, I thought I was the only person in the world who felt like I did. And so I didn't talk about it. I didn't come out. I didn't know what to do. And now there are kids who have parents who are affirming, who do have access to information that I didn't have access to, and who are free to be themselves. And like left-handed people, it just seems like there's more of us, but there was just as many back in my generation. We were just all in the closet. Now, kids are free to be themselves, and that's a good thing. So I want to end in terms of the call to action from Pastor Martin Niemöller. I don't know if some of you know of him. His poem, it's called a poem, is at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And he was I believe, a Lutheran pastor in Germany, and initially was a supporter of the Nationalist Socialist Party, but then realized what the Nazi Party was doing, and he became an ardent advocate against them and wound up being incarcerated. And he wrote this: "First they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. They're coming after me now, but don't think they're going to stop with me. We need all of us to stand together." Thank you.
We have some questions here. We have a little bit of time, so how about some questions here? Yeah, I'm not that fast. And can you maybe yell it out, and then if you would just repeat the question. Nice and loud. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, you said that there are appeals planned for a lot of these laws.
Yes, the question was, you framed it as appeals, but they're actually legal challenges. So there will be complaints filed. In fact, I just got a notice on my phone that Land O'Legal has filed a legal challenge to Tennessee's law in terms of what's going on in Tennessee. I left out drag bans in terms of a lot of the things that are going on, but Tennessee banned, healthcare, banned sports. So yes, there's a lot of lawsuits planned.
My question is, what kind of odds are you giving this? Is this something that's going to be settled more in the legal system, or is this something where we're going to have to work more politically?
The answer is yes. Look, I think initially things are going to be taking place in the court. The political process takes a while. We didn't get to where we are overnight. Elections take time, and there are election cycles, and in many states, the state legislatures have been gerrymandered to the point where it can be almost impossible to elect people who would be supportive of these issues. So I think initially we're going to have to look to the courts. It's hard to predict because most of these cases will probably be brought in federal court. Federal judges are appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. And of course, there can be some very liberal appointees, there can be some very conservative appointees, some very middle-of-the-road appointees. You don't know how it's going to go. Ultimately, I think these issues are going to wind up in the U.S. Supreme Court. It's a little hard to predict what the Supreme Court will do because you don't know, number one, what the makeup of the court will be when it gets there. And in terms of the Bostock decision, which I mentioned earlier, which was the Title VII case, which said, where the court, Justice Gorsuch said that you couldn't discriminate in employment because of sex, so it included transgender people. They specifically left open the question as to whether or not that included bathrooms. So that question was not decided in the Bostock case. The other issue left open in the Bostock decision is whether or not an employer can have a First Amendment right to not, to be exempt from the law, and so that they could say, well,
I have a deeply held religious belief that I don't have to employ gay or transgender people, and so that, again, remains open. And so we don't know what the court will do. We don't know what the court will do with the Title IX case in terms of, a lot of the laws that are being passed now go back and use the phrase biological sex. And so there's a case out of the West Virginia District Court which denied, a very sympathetic judge, but denied the lawsuit for a trans girl seeking to compete in sports because the law was phrased in terms of biological sex. And the judge held, well, it's not a violation of equal protection because they're treating all biological males, which was defined as someone who was born with male genitalia, and all biological females defined as someone who was born with female genitalia, equally. So it wasn't a denial of equal protection. I would say, most recently, I believe it's the Fourth Circuit is West Virginia, but don't quote me on that. It basically issued an injunction allowing the young girl to compete and staying the lower court's decision. So we're going to see these cases. Obviously the district courts and districts vary in terms of how conservative they might be, and same with the circuit courts, which are the appellate courts that are between the trial court level and the Supreme Court. You have the circuit courts, and those can vary widely. My own circuit, Third Circuit, which is New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, issued a decision in which it said that a trans boy could use the bathroom in accordance with his gender identity under Title IX. You're going to see other circuits that come down the other way, and that issue is then ultimately going to wind up in the Supreme Court. You're welcome.
And how do they hold?
I'm sorry?
And how will they hold? I mean, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I must confess I thought tonight there was more optimism than I was expecting. I mean, in terms of the law, not in terms of the legislature, because they're all jumping on top of one another to bill number one in one state after the next. But to my mind, your legal analysis here, I thought was more hopeful than I was thinking would be.
Well, because I think if you go with pure legal analysis, the courts should say that this is discrimination and that this is a violation of equal protection. I mean, you're singling out a group for different treatment than any other group, and you're doing it because of sex as defined by the U.S. Supreme Court. So for me, from a legal perspective, it seems like a very clear-cut argument. Unfortunately, I am not a federal judge or justice on the U.S. Supreme Court.
You were also a law review and I was not, so maybe that's why you know more law than I do. We have other questions here. Yeah, try. Everyone's on that side of the room here, please. Thanks a lot.
I know that ADF is considered a hate group by certain organizations, and they are funding and co-writing. Is there any way that they can, since they're tied to so much of this, can they use that in any way to take this down basically, saying a literal hate group is doing this to us. Can that be used in a legal precedent in any way?
I apologize. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Alliance Defending Freedom, which is...
Yes, no, I know. I got that part, that they're underwriting. And they're, if you look at the legislation in all of these states, it's almost identical. I mean, it's all cookie cutter created by them. So, and yes, they're funding all of this. And so is the question, is there any way that we can get funding on the other side to fight it?
Well, I'm asking because they've been labeled as a hate group. Can we use that in any way? There are some people consider them domestic terrorists almost.
So one of the things that I think the answer is maybe not because of the Alliance Defending Freedom, but if you listen to some of the statements by some of the state legislators in terms of what is being said at hearings, that can be used by lawyers. So for example, there was the Florida representative that called trans people X-Men and demons and imps and said that in public to an audience that included transgender people who were there to testify before that subcommittee. So I think those kinds of statements show an animus a bias, which in and of itself can be grounds for a court to say that the legislation was enacted for an improper purpose. So the answer is yes, I think those things, but not necessarily from the Alliance Defending Freedom, because they're not a legislative body, even though they've designed all the legislation, but because of some of the comments of state legislators in terms of what is being said at the hearing, I do think that that can be used to show an improper motive, animus, and bias in terms of enacting the legislation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
A lot of good speed there.
Thank you so much. Appreciate everything you've said and everything you're doing. I have a lot of liberal friends who support transgender rights, but also have concerns about medicalization of youth. The difference between those who have gender dysphoria, who might grow out of it, might just become, gay men or masculine identified women or lesbians, and identifying them as transgender youth and going down a medical route, which is kind of an irreversible route for men. And I want to hear what your response is to those people who have concerns about trying to discern the difference between those two populations.
Sure, and I'll give you two responses. One is a statistical response. The second is just a more practical and what I know medical practitioners to do. The first one is that the statistics that people use in terms of children who desist or detransition, and you can see numbers anywhere from 60 to 80%, and kind of go to the thing that, oh, well, they were just a gay man, or they were just, a lesbian. Those statistics are basically wrong for one important reason. They come out of two studies, one in Canada, one in Sweden, and they were not using gender dysphoria as the criteria. They were using gender identity disorder, which is a far broader category, and it meant and included anyone that exhibited behavior that was not consistent with the gender that they were assigned at birth. So, their gender expression might have been a little bit different. They might have, a boy playing with dolls, or a tomboy, what in my generation we would call, a girl who was, was very aggressive in terms of playing with the boys and everything else. And so they used a much broader category than gender dysphoria. And so what happens is those kids were all lumped in, and as you say, not all of them were transgender. A lot of them were just gay men, lesbians, or turned out to be straight men and women. So the statistics that you see are misleading. If you use gender dysphoria, and if you use what practitioners use now, which is, does the child insistently, consistently, and persistently, you've heard the expressions, identify in terms of their gender identity not aligned with the sex assigned at birth, the rates of the sisters, somebody that stops insisting, is extremely low. And so, I think, again, I go back to one of the points that I made. People see a lot more trans kids, a lot more trans teenagers, young adults, and they say, oh my God, there's an explosion. And there hasn't been. And in terms of the argument that, well, we don't want these kids to go down this road because it's irreversible, again, any medical practitioner worth their salt will follow the WPATH guidelines, World Professional Association for Transgender Health. They will follow those guidelines, and they are looking for kids that are suffering from gender dysphoria, and it doesn't always have to be gender dysphoria, because dysphoria sometimes can come on later, but the child still is transgender. But are they identifying insistently, consistently, and persistently? And those are the children that can get treatment, all right? Now, I go back to what I said earlier. The kids that are insistent, consistent, and persistent, or maybe even have gender dysphoria, so few of them get treatment because it's financially out of reach, or it's out of reach because their parents don't affirm them or are on the fence. And a parent who's on the fence and is like, well, I'm not sure I want to go down that road because, you know, it could be permanent. Well, it could be permanent if you don't go down the road and the child goes through puberty that is not in accordance with their gender identity, because certain changes that occur when someone goes through a puberty are hard to reverse. And I know because I've done it. So.
I just want to ask, what is your advice to people who are probably going to experience like living as someone who is illegal, right? Like, would you have any advice for surviving and thriving when the kind of person you are is not permitted to exist in a legal capacity?
That's a hard one to answer. Look, it's kind of interesting that when I came out, I started coming out to people in 2008, and I transitioned in 2009. It was actually much easier because people didn't know anybody who was transgender. I was like, what's that mean? For people today who are coming out and transitioning, it's a lot harder because everybody is like on one side or the other of the political fence, and either in your corner and supportive or not. I don't know what to tell you other than to be brave, to be true to yourself, because that's the only way you can survive. I mean, I know it seems like you're not going to survive if everybody's picking on you and not supporting you and everything else. It seems like there's no way forward. But all I can tell you is that the way forward is to be true to who you are and hope that the world catches up with you. And I think if you are true to yourself and allow yourself to thrive as yourself, you will be a better person. You will feel more confident. And I think people will feel more confident about, and I'm using you, I don't know if it was you or you're speaking for a friend, and I think that will show. And your own self-confidence will generate, you know, the respect from other people. You're welcome.
Hey there. Thank you again so much for coming and delivering this talk. I really appreciate it. My question, sort of bouncing off what you said earlier about how a lot of the legislation that's being proposed uses this sort of biological sex terminology to avoid explicitly naming transgender individuals as being the targets of the bills. Do you think that because of that sort of seemingly unbiased phrasing that a lot of these bills use, do you think that trans rights organizations will face problems in establishing standing when challenging these bills because they're not explicitly addressed?
I do. And the West Virginia case is a good example. The West Virginia federal district court judge was very sympathetic to she was a middle school girl. All she wanted to do was run track. And he was very sympathetic to her. And he recognized that the bill that was passed impacted exactly one person, her. That was it. And he said, you know, this doesn't seem right, it doesn't seem fair, but I'm not here to make the laws, I'm just here to interpret them. And as I said, he found that because of the way they define biological male and biological female in terms of genitalia, you know, that you were born with, he felt that met the criteria for equal protection. As I said, the Fourth Circuit they didn't reverse him, but he refused to issue an injunction. He had issued a preliminary injunction. He refused to issue a permanent injunction. And the Fourth Circuit said, no, we're going to put it back to when you had issued the preliminary injunction and keep it in place so she can participate because we want to hear the case. Look, it's the other side is smart. I'm not trying to say that they don't know what they're doing. They do. And they're trying their best to make it a tough fight. I'm hopeful that again, because of some of the things that people are saying in legislative bodies, that the courts will understand that this is all, it's smoke and mirrors, and that really what it is an animus against trans people. But, I mean, they do have a leg to stand on, and I won't take that away from them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Got a question here? Yeah, please.
And it isn't a question, it's a statement from a cisgender elder who notices that this world of contempt that is raining down on us in this country is not taking into consideration the number of people like me who have been through a lot of organizing and activism, and we stand as allies, we stand ready to support, we stand ready to show up in suits and dresses of opposite of our gender as assigned at birth, sex as assigned at birth. But nobody, the world has changed. This is not the world that made left-handed children write with their right hands.
No.
And they're not going to win. It's not up to you to fight this fight. It's up to all of us, and we're ready for it.
I love Mark. There are other questions here, yes, sir.
I'm just curious what you think the, if you had to point, I mean, I'm sure, you know, a lot of things, but what you would consider the instigating factor of this current wave of animus. What do you think? And also, partially, did you think this is a political inevitability? Like, as more and more visibility of trans people came to this country, did you expect this, or were you surprised by this?
I'm not trying to plug my books here, that'll come another time, but you know, when I started writing my book, it features a transgender criminal defense lawyer. And when I started writing it, it was 2000 and I want to say 15, 16. And we had a different administration in DC. LGBTQ was mentioned in the State of the Union address. Obergefell had been decided, allowing a same-sex marriage. I thought I was writing a book that would fall on, you know, there's no issue here. This has all been taken care of. So I can tell you I am shocked, unfortunately, surprised by the way things have gone in this country. Having said that, I realized probably sometime in 2018, 2019, that this was coming because it is all political, in my humble opinion, and it's just my opinion, because, again, there's no problems here. I mean, you know, these solutions that are being made into law are addressing problems that don't exist while we still have problems in terms of poverty and uninsured people. And, you know, so those are the problems that this country face in terms of the disproportionate distribution of wealth in this country. Those are the things that should be addressed. Immigration reform, those are the things that should be addressed. But I think, you know, when Donald Trump won the presidency, people learned that one of the ways to gain political advantage is to point to another who is different from most people and turn the people against that other, be it trans people, black people, Jewish people, Muslim people, immigrants, you name it. And so when he left the office, I think other politicians realized that one of the ways to get the base motivated to move forward with a political agenda to keep power was to point to another, meaning trans people, that, again, there's not a lot of us, And if you do it on a broad scale, it's hard to organize and combat it. And so we're an easy target. And so, yeah, I don't think we are a problem in this country. Again, there's at most 3 million of us. I mean, and most of us are, just normal people. When I walk into a room, I think I'm the most normal person in the room. And I think that's the way most trans people view themselves. We're just people trying to live our best lives. And so the attacks, again, from my point of view, are not because of anything we've done or said, but to get other people fired up so that they go out and vote. And one way to do that is to attack somebody who's different. And we're certainly different from cisgender folks. No question about that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Take it back to my seat. Okay. How about we'll have this as the last question, because I'm getting tired.
So I've seen that there are a lot of bad faith attacks on trans people these days, trying to smear them as going after children, child predators, groomers, things like that. They remind me of the kind of things that conservatives were saying about gay and lesbian people 10, 20, 30 years ago. And you did mention in your talk that that's, to an extent, it's kind of like, it's not as much of a political issue. It's harder to go after gay and lesbian people. It's easier to go after trans people now. But we still see this trend of this child predator smear. I was wondering if you could speak on that, why you think that that same kind of tactic is coming up again.
Because it's a way of making trans people look like they're demons, that we are trying to groom other people to be transgender, or that we are predators, and that we are going into the bathroom to try to molest and do devious things in the bathroom. I often say that transgender people use the bathroom for the same reason as everybody else. We have to go to the bathroom. And I repeat what I said earlier. I mean, look around this country. What are the issues in terms of trans people using bathrooms? There are none. There are no mass, incidents of trans people going in and molesting cisgender women in the bathroom, because trans women, number one, are women. We are going to the bathroom to go to the bathroom. Number two, usually, if a trans person hasn't had gender-affirming care, gender-affirming surgery, in other words, they still have the genitalia that they were assigned at birth, the most nervous person in the bathroom is the trans person, because they don't want a problem. They just want to blend in, do what they got to do, and get out. And so the way to make it seem like there's something more devious at work is to call us predators, when again, nobody can point to trans people molesting anyone. I mean, if you look at cases in terms of people being charged with child molestation, you will find ministers and politicians and business people and everybody else. You're not finding trans people. You're not finding drag queens. You're not finding those people charged with child molestation. So it's just a way to demonize a population, again, because there's so few of us. People, they all must be, groomers and child molesters or child predators. And we're not. There's a false equivalency that it just doesn't exist. Again, every trans person I know, all they're trying to do is live their best life. And again, to demonize someone, to equate them with being a groomer or predator, is an attempt to marginalize them and then to be able to say we should eradicate them. That's all it is. You're welcome.
Thank you. A couple of things. Thank you all for coming. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed it, and you were a great crowd. Thank you so much.